Hello, BookTube. We're continuing with our chapter-by-chapter read-along of The Lord of the Rings, a kind of chapter-by-chapter read-along that I have been sort of stumbled into here, and I'm very much enjoying it. We're in The Return of the King. David Wiley and Tony from An Erudite Adventure and I started this reread of Lord of the Rings with The Two Towers. We skipped The Fellowship of the Ring, and I'm glad that we did. It's the first time I've ever really done this. I've picked and choosed. I've jumped back and forth. I've read this book. I don't know how many times, but usually when I have read it from beginning to end, I have jumped around a bit, read long chunks here and there. But going through it, starting with The Two Towers, so you don't have that momentum imparted to you from Fellowship of the Ring, and also going at it a chapter a day has really, really been wonderful. So I'm going to keep going. And we are today at a chapter called The Muster of Rohan. Our narrative is split now into three directions, each one of them Hobbit anchored. So we have Pippin, the Hobbit Pippin has gone with Gandalf to the Kingdom of Gondor, which is about ready to face a massive assault from the Dark Lord Sauron, the Lord of the Rings. We also have the Hobbit Sam and the Hobbit Frodo, who are taking the One Ring of Power into Mordor, Sauron's stronghold, in order to destroy it, and they are accompanied by Gollum, the creature Gollum. We were following their adventures, and we will be getting back to them. But there is another Hobbit, and that is Merry, and he is with King Theoden of Rohan, to whom he has pledged his service. And we are following them back to King Theoden. Theoden and his men and our heroes have fought a great battle, and we followed that at the end of The Two Towers, and now they are returning back to Theoden's kingdom so that he can muster his forces properly, not as many people as you can grab overnight and then we're off at speed, but rather a full military muster in order to bring the military might of Rohan to Gondor to its aid. And also against the war that is coming now on all sides to everybody. He doesn't have to march off to it. And we're with Merry during that ride. And the Muster of Rohan starts off with a passage that is of a type that when you're reading Lord of the Rings, especially when you're reading it quickly, or when you're going for your favorite exciting bits or whatnot, you sometimes tend to overlook, which is Tolkien's brilliance for pastoral imagery. His writing in this book is amazing. Even in the parts that seem at first devoid of much action. In the chapter called The Muster of Rohan, there is not much in the way of action. Not much happens in the chapter. You could summarize it in one sentence. You could, if you wanted to, synopsize it in one sentence or two sentences in some other chapter. It's one of those rare chapters in Lord of the Rings that does not need to be there, because we already know what Theoden is going to do. He's going to muster his forces. We already know that. If the chapter doesn't give us much more than that, then it doesn't need to be a chapter on its own. And this chapter doesn't give us much more than that. We'll get to what the chapter gives us. But first, I wanted to read you a passage, just one reading this time, just to indulge me here. The day was waning. In the last rays of the sun, the riders cast long, pointed shadows that went on before them. Darkness had already crept beneath the murmuring fir woods that clothed the steep mountainsides. The king rode now slowly at the end of the day. Presently the path turned round a huge shoulder of rock and plunged into the gloom of soft sighing trees. Down, down they went in long, winding file. When at last they came to the bottom of the gorge, they found that evening had fallen in the deep places. The sun was gone. The twilight lay upon the waterfalls. All day, far below them, a leaping stream had run down from the high pass behind, cleaving its narrow way between pine-clad walls, and now through a stony gate it flowed out and passed into a wider vale. The riders followed it, and suddenly Harrowdale lay before them, loud with the noise of waters in the evening. There the white Snowbourn, joined by the lesser stream, went rushing, fuming on the stones, down to Edoras and the green hills and the plains. Away to the right, at the head of the great dale, the mighty Starkhorn loomed up above its vast buttresses swathed in clouds, and its jagged peak, clothed in everlasting snow, gleamed far above the world, blue-shadowed upon the east, red-stained by the sunset in the west. And that is just lovely. There are passages like that all throughout the sections here, even when you're not getting a huge amount of wizard fire or orc death or whatnot. And you don't get that in this chapter. This chapter, the summary of it is that Theoden and his men reach his stronghold. They reach Eowyn, who we last saw arguing with Aragorn about, why can't I go with you? Why can't I wield a sword? I don't want to be keeping hearth and home while the men go out and win renown. She doesn't win that argument, and we meet her here. She tells Theoden and Éomer and Merry that Aragorn has chosen to take the paths of the dead, and Merry learns a little bit about about the folklore that has accrued all around them, and how it's unlikely that any of them will ever see Aragorn alive again. But the main action of the story is a call to action and a refusal of a call to action. A rider comes from Gondor, bearing a token from the steward Denethor, urging Theoden to make haste, urging him to, in the name of the long friendship between Rohan and Gondor, to ride as fast as possible for the relief of the city. And this messenger is very urgent, but Theoden tells him, it's going to be a week before my forces are ready to move. This is not what we saw already with Theoden, where he grabs basically a flying company of men. This is a full military muster, and that's going to take a week. And the messenger is incredibly grim and says that it'll very likely in a week, if you come to Gondor, you will find it a ruin. And you may be able to give a little bit of discomfort to the orcs and the eastern men that live there, but you won't be able to help us. We'll all be dead. And Theoden, there is no help for it. And you certainly can't bully an old king. Theoden says, well, then at least we'll do that. But I need a week. We can't move any faster than that. That is the call to action. And eventually, of course, it gets sped up a little. The whole point of these chapters, of these two narratives, the two Hobbit narratives of Merry and Pippin, is increasing urgency. That's actually the whole point of The Return of the King, is to steadily, in a narrative way, increase the tension to the climax of the whole book. But at first, the call is refused, that we can't move immediately, we need a week to muster our forces. That is the call to action. And then there's a refusal of a call to action. Now, part of that we've already seen, because Éowyn has already said, she's already told Aragorn, I want to go to war. I am a shield maiden of Rohan. I am skilled with a sword and shield. I don't want to just sit at home with the old women and the children. I want to fight. And she's been told no. She has accurately diagnosed that it's just because she's a woman. She's been told no. She still has that urge. She doesn't really speak all that openly of it to Theoden, but she still has that urge. Theoden has said it himself. He said it in her hearing, that this is the end. This is the last fight of this age. So there is no safety. There's no point in hiding or in safeguarding the days of your life up in the hills, because you will be found. If you're on the losing side, you will be found. You will lose anyway. And if you're on the winning side, you will have missed the renown that comes with everyone doing their part. So she already knows that. She is sharp in that desire. That hasn't gone away. Aragorn didn't argue her out of that. And the other person who wants to go to war is Merry himself, who is riding a little pony, and he is a favorite of Theoden. Theoden likes him, almost like a son. But as Theoden tells him in this chapter, we have a day together still, but when the full muster of Rohan is made and we ride to war, we will ride on the main road at speed on giant horses. And you can't make that voyage. You can't do that. Your little pony cannot possibly keep pace with our horses, and you would hamper one of my men if you were baggage on the back of his horse. I would like it, but it's not possible. Now, Merry very much objects to that, and Theoden puts it off a little because he doesn't want to disappoint his friend and his ward. But nevertheless, at the peak of the chapter, we have two characters who very much want to ride to war and are being told they can't. Which, if you have read any fiction at all, you know how that's going to go, right? And sure enough, Merry is fuming about not being able to ride to war with Theoden and his men in Gondor for the relief of Gondor, when he is approached by a soldier who he doesn't recognize, Durnhelm, who has a nice face-covering mask on, and who says, you can ride with me. I'll even hide you under my cloak so that no one can argue about it. You can ride with me to war. And that's it. That's the chapter. So I find it hard to believe there's any reader of this book, even for the first time, who's not immediately going to be able to guess who Durnhelm is. But Merry is certainly going to war. And that is the chapter. Theoden is preparing to muster his forces. He gets an emissary from Gondor telling him, "You're mustering too slow. We need more speed. We need relief." And then that's it. He vows to move a little faster, and then the chapter ends. So, not a lot going on here. There's a lot of beautiful imagery, and it's really interesting to hear Theoden and Éomer talk about the folklore of the Paths of the Dead, the folklore of Aerlingus, and all the history of Rohan and all. It's really interesting in a way. It's interesting to see some of the people that they encounter who have already, days before, encountered Gandalf on Shadowfax, urging them, telling them what is happening. Also, they have seen the terror of a winged rider. So war is definitely about. Theoden is absolutely right that it would do him no good to hide and take his ease behind walls, because there is no ease and there will be no safety. He will either ride to combat and victory, or, as he intimates many times in this chapter and many times before, death. Or death will come for him. So why he is counseling Éowyn, why anyone is counseling Éowyn, a willing warrior, to stay behind, I think that maybe the logic that Tolkien is intentionally bringing out to talk about it really works against him. But those of you who know the story or have seen the movies will already know that that logic doesn't get very much. It doesn't go very far. But that's it. That's the chapter for today. So we're going to move on to, let's see, the next chapter is... I'll put my bookmark there. The Siege of Gondor, which is, we move back to Pippin and Gandalf, and some very important things happen. So we'll move on to that next time, and I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.